I'm all in into altcoins, and there's always the question, am I in the right altcoins? That's why I've created this video with a watch list and the altcoins that I potentially add to my portfolio. The markets are doing pretty okay, as we have seen that Bitcoin is swimming around an all-time high and Ethereum has been moving upwards. But it's not yet the entire sentiment that we want to see, which is that famous bull market where everybody jumps into crypto. And that is completely understandable because most of the people framework or reference their peak valuation of their portfolio to the current valuation, which I think doesn't really make sense. But we need to put things in perspective, which is that Ethereum is currently 90% up since the low in April. And the low was established in the second week of April, which is great. That's a great performance if we put it in that framework. If we look at the previous all-time high and the current valuation of Ethereum, then there is still a lot of upside to be made. And we need to realize that we are still at the start of a bull cycle, as the chances of erasing the 4-year cycle have significantly increased as there are more important variables added to the entire charts and towards the markets. It's all driven by liquidity. And the question is then, has it always been liquidity and the 4-year cycle just fell over the liquidity cycle? Or have things changed over the years? And that's why it's important that we are looking at this chart, which I keep on referencing to, which is the chart of the Chinese renminbi versus ETH valued against Bitcoin. What it shows is the fact that I keep on tweeting about it. Every time when the Chinese renminbi goes up a little bit versus the US dollar, a few days later, Ether starts to move up. So, as you can see in this chart, we have seen that the bottoming process for ETH versus Bitcoin took substantially longer, which means that last month we had a massive wick on the Chinese renminbi, and that same week we had a wick on Ether versus Bitcoin. So, since then, the Chinese renminbi started to move upwards, the dollar started to collapse, lowest valuations of the dollar in the past few years. And in the same period, we've seen Ethereum starting to move up against Bitcoin, resulting into this 90% upwards move. And ETH against Bitcoin is up around 50%, I think. On top of that, we've seen that in the previous cases of the Chinese renminbi bottoming out, it also signaled a bottom on ETH versus Bitcoin. So, over the past cycles, where we didn't really discuss any macroeconomics, this was already taking place. And if this has been taking place, it's something you need to consider when we're looking at the actual markets. So, what is next is then the question, which is, well, we are currently waiting for a long time, and we are currently seeing the valuations of Ethereum still being a lot lower than the all-time high, which is what we reference to as the boring stage of the markets. And that's why I brought up this visual, which, if we look at the phases of a bull cycle, we are in that slow, boring phase where the markets start to go up a little bit. And that's also called the stealth phase, which is the phase where the markets aren't really moving upwards. And if it goes up, people will likely say it's going to go down really soon, as that has been happening for the previous years. And in this case, the private markets in the VC space are completely gone. We run a venture capital, which was awarded the best fund last week of the Netherlands, which is great. But we are looking in those private markets, scooping for potential financial opportunities, but also trying to push forward the adoption of crypto. And what we've seen is that a lot of those raises are not really happening anymore. It's very selective, which makes it hard, and that's what we also can see in the normal markets. So it needs to be built up again, through which people start to believe that there is actually a case of upwards potential in these markets. And therefore, you can ultimately conclude that what we see on social media is the opposite of what is likely what is happening, which is on social media we see the start of the altcoin bear market, but the start of an altcoin bear market doesn't start at cycle lows. It starts at cycle highs. So that means that my altcoin portfolio is currently still in a stage of accumulation. And that brings two very interesting topics. First of all, am I in the correct altcoins? And secondly, what opportunity cost do I have? Am I allocated in the right altcoins? And if there is a better opportunity, what is that going to bring to me? So, as you know, I spent all my time analyzing, explaining, and trading in these markets. I've been doing that for the past 8.5 years. And we try to improve the quality of the content on the social media channel, on the YouTube channel, on X. And we're going to integrate more educational content. If you enjoy what we're doing, let me know which altcoins I should be having in my portfolio in the comment section beneath. And also, please subscribe to this YouTube channel. Then I'll make sure to continue delivering the content that you ask for. So, the first question that we need to ask, that we asked is, am I in the right altcoins? And the reason that I'm asking this is that in a bull market, every altcoin goes up, which is, for instance, with the example that I'm showing, it started to rally. It did do a 33x, but it didn't really outperform as Bitcoin as much. And there were way better altcoins to be in. So you need to be looking at altcoins that are going to yield you a beta return and an alpha return. And the beta return is basically just looking at a case, or any of these two, you can basically reference in the way you want it, but you have the market that technically goes up. So in general, the markets are going up 10 to 15x. That's the base return you want to have with altcoins, depending on the size that you're in. And then secondly, how much unique value is the altcoin adding on top of that? So if you say the markets are going to go up by 10 to 15x, and this project is adding so much value that it can do a 3 or 4x additionally, that's where the actual return starts to kick in. And we're looking for this upside. And that's why you're doing a lot of fundamental research. That's why you try to build a unique portfolio. So if we have that, then there is always that opportunity costs of being in the wrong altcoins or staying in altcoins for too long. And that's where something that we call opportunity costs come in. So for instance, if I stay in an altcoin that has been going up, what is the question, or what is the upside for the altcoin versus the upside of a different altcoin? So for instance, if my altcoin has seen a 5x run, is it likely going to do another 2 to 3x? Or am I better off swapping into a different altcoin that is going to yield me that 2 to 3x? And that is where the concept of opportunity costs come in. And that's why I'm going to explain this with my current portfolio, and also going to explain some of the altcoins that I'm watching. Let's assume we are having the altcoin portfolio and it continues to do well. That is the first case. For sure, I'll be having some coins that might be doing better than others, or we're going to have coins that are not going to provide that return on top of the beta of the market, right? In the sense that if we are having that standard return, then we might be better off by going into different altcoins. And that's, if we look at the altcoin portfolio, then the altcoin portfolio is basically entirely into the ETH ecosystem. There are some outside of the ETH ecosystem. For instance, Sai is currently not the ETH ecosystem, of course. And it's currently pretty much diversified in the sense that we have 4 big ones and we have 5 smaller ones. And we're still down like 50 to 60%, depends on when you're looking at it. But we can basically make a shadow list for all the coins that we have here. So for instance, if we're looking at things like Sai, we can also have a shadow list and see how other layer 1s are going to do. For instance, in that case, on my watch list of altcoins to potentially add to the portfolio is something like Sui. Yes, it has been seeing the hack, but that is usually short term. There's also stuff happening on Ether, not on the Ether chain itself, but on DEXs. There has been stuff happening on Solana. It's not uncommon and it's not going to destroy the entire chain. But what we do know is that Sui is currently in a trend upwards, where if you want to maximize your return on the short term, you might be looking to include Sui into your portfolio and get it out at a later point in the market, which we'll discuss in a little bit. So Sui is one of the coins that I'm currently watching. Secondly, we have protocols like TIA in our portfolio. And then you need to look at how TIA is doing in terms of upward potential compared to, for instance, Eigenlayer, which is kind of the same infrastructure play. And if one of the two is underperforming, you might want to rotate into the other one at the right time possible, which in this case, my shadow for Celestia is Eigenlayer, as I think that Eigenlayer has seen its first correction and is currently starting to wake up, which is a fundamental one to have for the entire ecosystem. Now, if we're looking at things like the Ether ecosystem, we have one big risk, which is fully betting on it, and in potential it can be underperforming. So that is what we need to discuss in the coming period, whether or not we're going to start seeing strength into the ETH ecosystem. For instance, Optimism is currently underperforming substantially, as it is into a case of hitting cycle lows. And instead of looking at something that hasn't been performing, we kind of know for sure that the deep in vertical is going to be substantially big. I think it's probably what we call DeFi of 2020 or AI or NFTs or whatever it is. It's going to have its first real run. And I think that there's a lot of value and upside for retail investors in terms of investing in the token, but also in terms of farming those points or tokens or whatever you want. So, for instance, shadowing Optimism is not really looking at Arbitrum, but I might be looking at a project like Crest that has seen its first real correction, has seen a lot of upside taking place there already in terms of adoption and amount of machines that are working in the ecosystem. And in the previous updates, I've also been saying that Peak is on the list, but Peak, I would say, is a smaller project. So that would be in the basket of smaller allocations. Grass is the outstanding biggest player of that vertical and therefore implies the lowest risk. And that would be potentially a big position. So right now, I think we have 3 protocols that are on the list. And if, for instance, something in a vertical is going to do really, really well, so Tao starts to move and expand quickly, you might know for sure that anything in that vertical is starting to move. So that's why if, for instance, Nillion, which is a new protocol, is not really moving as of yet, it might be good to rotate from Tau into Nillion. And that's the second thing that I'm watching for my portfolio. If something starts to do really well, you don't need to rebalance it in the portfolio. You can also choose newer coins. So those are the watch lists that I have for my bigger ones. And then you get into the smaller territory, which is in principle the same way going through it. So for instance, for Rocket Pool, which is a DeFi protocol, and if we look at the chart, it is absolutely disastrous at this stage as we are still swimming around cycle lows, which is now, I think it is 95% down or 90% down since the high in 2023. And if we add the previous years on top of it, it's down even more. And on the other hand, we have protocols that are waking up and starting to show strength. So for instance, EtherFi or Pendle are projects, or even Curve are projects that are on the short list to rotate in if Rocket Pool continues to show weakness. So if in the coming 1 to 2 months the markets are going to move up and Rocket Pool is not performing, in the next correction I might rotate Rocket Pool into, for instance, EtherFi, which is getting a massive amount of TVL, Pendle, which is the same, or Curve, which is adding a lot of TVL to the protocol as well. And then if we look at the other smaller coins like Renzo or Omni, there is a case that we can be small or take a small step into a new vertical. And then I would like to add RWA or perhaps Deepin, as I previously discussed. But RWA in the sense of Clearpool, which is currently showing the exact same as many of the altcoin charts, but it has proven that once the markets start to rotate and it is going to attract a lot of hype, then this is going to provide a lot of yield. As in the previous cycle of the upwards run from August all the way towards January, it went 10x. And finally, for things like Aevo in my portfolio, on the other hand, I've got protocols like Woo or Skill that I'm monitoring to potentially add to my portfolio. So as you can see, there are a lot of projects that are on the list to potentially be added into the portfolio. The prime risk is to be entirely into Ether, which we know. That's why I do have a short list of coins that are outside of the Ether ecosystem that if we continue to fill with a return, we're going to rotate it back into different verticals. The big question is, why are you still in altcoins, or why am I still in altcoins? This is something that we would like to discuss in the upcoming weeks. So that is going to be a video that you will be seeing on the channel, as it is a very solid question to ask. However, if you are into altcoins, you need to make a game plan, making sure that you make the best decisions possible and that you're able to reflect your portfolio at all times and are able to rotate when necessary. For instance, when there is a trend switch or when there is a new narrative waking up, that's completely fine. And that's why I basically have a second list outside of my normal coins that I'm monitoring, making sure that if I see something underperforming and nothing is really changing on the horizon, I'm able to swap or adjust when required. I'm still heavily, excited, confident that we're going to see strength in the altcoin markets. It's taking a lot of time, but that time that you are waiting will be rewarded with some great returns. I'll see you again on the next update. Ciao! During these markets, I'm always looking for opportunities to build my portfolio, and OKX is bringing you an opportunity. They are the first fully licensed exchange in Europe with the lowest fees. And to help you a little bit with your portfolio and to celebrate this milestone, they are giving away up to 50 euros in Bitcoin if you sign up today on the exchange. Signing up can be done within 5 minutes, and if you deposit 100 euros worth of crypto, you'll receive the first 20 euros in Bitcoin. Start rebuilding your portfolio today. Go to the link in the description or scan the QR code and enjoy up to 50 euro in Bitcoin.